We're off on a Sunday drive, and not just anywhere, in Italy, where we join Seth Doane at the most beautiful car race in the world.
Quickly, quickly!
This father-son duo came from California to race this tiny 1957 Fiat on the back roads of Italy.
Slow, slow, slow. We're way off on that one.
A graduation celebration for the classic car-obsessed David Ely. He and his dad Len set off among almost 100 others, practicing for a stunningly scenic race with routes stretching back nearly a century. Their car was the first off the starting line in 1957.
That was how this started, was he emailed me the newsreel and said, Joe owns this, we could do the Mille, and it was kind of like, oh.
You're just using this for directions.
Their friend Joe Hurwicz bought this Fiat specifically to race in the Mille Miglia. Mille means 1,000 in Italian, and Miglia is miles. This 1,000-mile race of classic cars on open roads goes from Brescia to Rome and back over 5 days.
It's the great race.
What makes this the great race?
Enzo Ferrari called it the most beautiful race in the world.
Yeah.
And we're here to find out if that's true.
This most beautiful race in the world began in 1927, and pausing for the war continued until a terrible crash in 1957 killed 2 drivers and 9 spectators. A tragedy dramatized in the 2023 film Ferrari. It's been back since the late 70s as a follow the speed limit rally of precise timed trials. Last year, more than 400 classic and vintage cars were accepted, including that Fiat 600 the Elys drove, and another car their friend Joe Hurwicz bought, this 1931 Aston Martin.
You buy a car, or in your case, cars, to get in.
It's not the person that gets in, it's the car. The car has to be either the original car that ran in the race between 1927 and 57, or it has to be the same model of a car that ran in the race.
It's Hurwicz's 5th Mille Miglia after trying to get in for a decade.
It's a bit of an obsession, this.
You sound like my wife.
We understood better while out for a spin.
Maybe a little further if you don't mind. It's kind of fun.
You mean you might get hooked?
I might get hooked.
The non-car guy?
I'm going to need a new job to get really hooked.
The race was passing through villages just on your doorstep.
Growing up in Brescia, Francesca Perolin was raised on the Mille Miglia.
So make sure you check the next page.
Now she's the COO helping to run it.
And the cars being raced could be your daily car.
But it's not exactly daily cars being raced today.
What do you say to someone who says this all just feels out of touch with the world today, kind of underlines the inequality in the world?
Well, of course, some of the cars are expensive, but the secret of Mille Miglia is that it's a celebration of our history and everyone can be part of. We have spectators on the road, they don't have to pay. And after all, you can take part into the Mille Miglia with a Fiat 600. You don't need a $20 million car.
Cars cannot have any major modifications and need to be properly restored. We spoke near where they're checked and certified to race.
Mille Miglia is, by now, the largest motorsport event in the world.
Largest motorsport event in the world.
It is.
You think of Formula One?
No. We have more cars, we have more miles, we have more spectators on the road.
It's that dream of, if you've watched the Mille Miglia, you know, you're standing in the street and you're seeing these cars going by and you're thinking, oh gosh, I'd love to do that. Well, this actually makes it possible.
Debbie Travis, a British-Canadian TV personality, and her car-loving husband, Hans Rosenstein, have a villa in Tuscany not far from where the Mille Miglia passes by. Now they host a week-long Mille Miglia-inspired classic car rally retreat for tourists, including Jim and JC Germani, who came from Osterville, Massachusetts.
The Ferrari, I've been wanting to drive that car ever since I was 7 years old.
And what's better than driving a Ferrari through Italy?
And it's a bit like being in kindergarten. I have to say to people, no, you've been in the Bugatti once, you have to do this. So, you know, they get to drive usually 2 or 3 cars a day, so they're swapping as we go along with pit stops.
They wind along picturesque roads, including nearby Pienza.
The hardest thing for the driver is the scenery is so breathtaking, you know, but they've got to keep their eyes on the road.
Back in Brescia, eyes are on these cars as they turn the streets into an open-air museum. Jack Broomall and Lisa Barrow first did a test run at a scaled-back Miglia rally in the U.S.
This one is more intense. We're still married, so that's good.
Check in again in about a week.
A friend from the U.S. helped them borrow this 1955 Alfa Romeo.
And where can you go and walk down the street and see half a dozen Bugattis and 4 going Mercedes all being driven, right? It's the neatest dynamic car show ever.
That's a big part of this. These cars are not sitting. They're not under lights. They're on the road.
These are not cars that are maintained in someone's elegant garage at home. I like that element of it, that the cars are driven. And they're driven hard. They're driven like they were meant to be in the day.
This journey is also a test of driver's endurance in these old cars, often without much protection from the elements. Over the 1,000 miles, Jack Broomall and Lisa Barrow did remain married. We saw Joe Hurwitz passing through Rome in his Aston Martin, accomplishing the same goal that David and Len Ely set.
We're just going to have fun. Our goal is to finish.
Finish they did. A test of mechanics, will, and despite cheering fans lining the roads, humility.
I mean, the Italians love the car. It's amazing, you know. They don't care about us, but which is perfectly fine. The car is the star.
In our postcard from Florence, Seth Doan shares a secret of the Italian Renaissance, some 500 years in the making.
There's a small gray door down here. They'll take us into the Vespa corridor.
In Ron Howard's film Inferno, Tom Hanks uses it as an escape route. The Vasari corridor enables Hanks' character to evade police in the center of Florence, emerging into the Uffizi gallery. This passageway was a World War II escape path in Roberto Rossellini's 1946 film Paisa, and has been a fascination long before the advent of film. It dates back to the Renaissance.
This is a lot of fuss over a hallway.
This is a very special hallway.
Ike Schmidt met us in this very special hallway, which was closed in 2016 for repairs and fire code updates.
You are the first to shoot in here.
We visited in March last year when it was still under renovation and when Schmidt was still director of Florence's Uffizi Gallery, which manages the Vasari corridor and reopened it in December.
That was the daily commute on foot, pedestrian commute of the Grand Dukes for several centuries.
It was built in 1565 for the powerful Cosimo de' Medici and his family.
Nowadays, we have skyways in Houston, especially in Minneapolis, for climatic reasons. But back then, it was totally unique.
And constructed for, let's call them, practical reasons.
The Medici could easily move backwards and forward. No one knew where they were. The Vasari corridor also served to listen to the people on the street. There was no technological surveillance back then. But opening the windows, even today, you hear every single word that is being spoken on the street.
This was about convenience, it was about safety for the Medici, it was about security.
Absolutely.
The skyway snakes for more than half a mile through Florence, stretching from the Uffizi, then the seat of government, above the streets, across the river, past the Boboli Gardens to Palazzo Pitti.
There's a very long hallway which connects two of the most important buildings in Florence, but originally it didn't go that far. It ended in the Boboli Gardens, and that changed with Ferdinando de' Medici, who connected it with the Pitti Palace, which became the new home of the Medici family after Eleonora of Toledo had acquired it.
What does the reopening mean?
The reopening means a lot of emails, a lot of requests.
Elaine Ruffalo is an art historian who does tours of Florence.
What is the fascination?
The fascination is because people like to enter a space that is exclusive. They feel like it's secret. I mean, how do you build a kilometer-long corridor running through the very heart of Florence in 5 months? I mean, hats off to Giorgio Vasari, the architect. Of course, there's big money behind it. It was Medici money, Medici ducal money.
Who were the Medici?
So the Medici come on the scene as early as the mid-13th century. Like so many other families that are pouring into Florence to try to make some money after this period of the Middle Ages. And they began as merchants, but then they became bankers. And the Medici got their hands on the papal bank account. And from that on, it was an explosion of wealth.
We met Ruffalo on the banks of the Arno River.
So Giorgio Vasari built this thing in 1565 in only 5 months. But one reason he was able to do so quickly is he was using pre-existing buildings to help carry the Vasari corridor. So if you look up this way, you can see that there's a series of arches that at one time was the old fish market. Then he turns left at the top of the Ponte Vecchio, uses the oldest bridge in Florence.
The aptly named Ponte Vecchio, or Old Bridge, was built in 1345. Today it's home to jewelers and goldsmiths, another legacy of the Medici.
This bridge originally was a place where they would sell fish and meat and tanners and anything you can imagine, like a medieval souk almost.
Why the change?
Well, because when the Medici finished their corridor, it was Ferdinando de' Medici in 1593 who didn't want the smell of all that fish and meat as he was making his way to the Palazzo Pitti.
Pesky vendors removed, a fancy skyway installed for VIPs. It all sounds pretty familiar.
And above, of course, the Medici are walking over your heads and you're not even aware of it.
And now visitors can again retrace the steps of the Medici in a passageway which seems to lead to another time.
No serious exploration of the wonders of gastronomy is complete without a visit to Rome with Seth Doane.
Some of Rome's masterpieces are constructed out of marble and travertine. Others are made from pecorino cheese and cracked pepper, including this centuries-old pasta dish.
What exactly is cacio e pepe?
So cacio is an old-fashioned word to say cheese, formaggio. So cacio e pepe, cheese and pepper. And the cheese used is pecorino romano. Grazie.
Sophie Minchilli does food tours and grew up in Rome.
So it's funny because I go through phases of life. I'm currently in a carbonara phase of life, but I just came out of the cacio e pepe phase of life. So it seems easy because it only has 2 ingredients. But the trick is to get it creamy.
And this movement helps you to make the perfect cream.
Gabriele Giura is head chef at Ruscioli, which is in the pantheon of popular pasta places in Rome.
In 2 ingredients, you can find everything. The flavor, the taste. The taste is unbelievable.
Giura showed us his technique, combining the cheese and pepper with pasta water, then blending it before mixing it with the cooked pasta. There are some rules: no butter, no heavy cream.
The day I'm gonna add the heavy cream, I'm gonna look for another job. That's the sound.
What's the sound?
What we call this the sound of love.
I've tried to make cacio pepe at home, and I get clumps of cheese, and it's kind of stringing. It's not what you envision.
It happens also to the best, but it happens.
Maria Elena Roscioli figures her family's restaurant serves about 80 plates a day of this dish with humble beginnings. It's thought to have been a staple for shepherds on the Roman countryside with its simple and local ingredients. Her father Marco was a shepherd before opening a bakery in Rome. Later, brothers Alessandro and Pierluigi expanded, actually taking inspiration from the high-end grocer Dean and DeLuca in Manhattan. Now they've brought their version, Roscioli, back to New York.
Do you recognize how popular cacio e pepe has become around the world?
Yes, of course. Especially in New York, the cacio e pepe in our restaurant is more popular than the carbonara.
Back in Rome, Sophie Minchili's food tour features a cacio e pepe twist on these Roman rice balls called supplì.
I got you the special of the day, which is cacio e pepe with candied lemon.
Pizza cacio e pepe.
We sampled a cacio e pepe pizza a few years back.
Vorrei un cono con cacio e pepe.
Perfetto.
And tried Carla D'Ambrosio's gelato version.
It's good. Buono.
But there's nothing like the real thing. And Sophie Minchili says everyone has their favorite neighborhood spot for it. Hers is Al Pompiere.
The woman who runs the restaurant was saying, cacio e pepe. Why is everyone so obsessed with cacio e
No,
pepe?
it's true because the locals just think it's that quick plate that you make at home, but somehow abroad it's become a big deal.
So of the many wonders Rome has given us, one must not forget cacio e pepe. Simply delicious, yet hardly simple.
Buon appetito.
Buon appetito.
You say you didn't quite make it to Italy this summer? No worries. With Seth Doan, we're off to a site that's truly an underground sensation.
This primeval place of caves carved into the cliffs is a chameleon of sorts in cinema. Standing in is the ancient Holy Land in Passion of the Christ, or the remake of Ben-Hur. And making a modern-day cameo as itself in James Bond, No Time to Die. These winding roads, historically without the speeding Aston Martin, snake through the hillside town of Matera in southern Italy's Basilicata region. A good backdrop for even those just pretending to be in the movies as kids.
It was a big playground. We felt like Indiana Jones exploring empty caves.
Indiana Jones running around through these little streets.
Vito Rondinone grew up in what's called the Sassi.
Sassi in Italian literally means stones. But here in Matera, by Sassi, we are referring to two ancient neighborhoods of the old town. Their main feature is that behind almost all the buildings, there is a cave.
How old is this place?
Here are remains of Neolithic villages that date back to more than 6,000 years ago. From that time, man has probably never left this place.
UNESCO declared it a World Heritage Site in 1993, noting Matera was first inhabited during the Paleolithic period, showing continuous human occupation through several millennia.
Why were people digging into the hillsides here?
Because the rock is very soft.
Rondinone, who's a guide with tours by locals, showed us the simple cave his dad uses to age wine.
Salute.
Salute.
And the far more spectacular.
Here we are in one of the most fascinating caves of the Sassi. It's a church. It's one of the so-called rock churches. So as you can see, it's completely dug out of the rock.
A vast centuries-old network of cisterns to collect rain and spring water allowed the city to develop and endure.
You can stay in a cave where our ancestors lived thousands of years ago.
Those ancestors, however, were not living like this.
We tried to restore the original cave dwellings and converted them into hotel rooms.
Michele Centonze is a manager at the luxury hotel Sextanzio.
This is the executive suite number 13.
They offer tourists the chance to glimpse another era.
You have to imagine that in the past, it used to be a big house for a family of 10, 12 people with donkeys, animals.
This stable turned suite now goes for upwards of $1,500 a night.
We try to be as much respectful of the identity of the place as possible.
Yet in the 1950s, Matera was having an identity crisis, with a reputation for being the shame of Italy. During the country's post-war economic slump, Carlo Levi, a famous writer, detailed the squalid conditions, humans and animals living together in caves.
He compared the Sassi to a circle of the Dante's hell. So
a circle of Dante's hell.
Yeah, it's a very strong description. But also, thanks to that description, the spotlight on this strange city turned on.
A local museum recreates how families lived until Italy's government relocated most of the population to modern homes in the 1950s. For decades, much of the Sassi sat empty.
There's still a lot that needs to be developed here.
Yeah, a lot of caves that were abandoned in the 1950s, and they are so expensive to be restored.
That's something restaurateur and entrepreneur Michele Bandini sure knows.
It's a unique place to work.
It is. It's a unique place to work, and then you find these, these crazy surprises. I mean, you move a brick and you find cisterns.
What do you do when you find a cistern and you're renovating a bar or restaurant?
The easiest thing is to pretend you actually didn't find a cistern.
Are you really telling me that on camera?
Because it is so complicated.
Bandini, who's South African, fell in love with the man from Matera and then with the town itself.
How much has life changed here in the 30 years you've been in Modena?
Wow, how much can life change?
She's been a part of that, opening the hip bar, Area 8.
Cheers.
She invited us for aperitivo. Their bartender crafts his own gin and ice.
Matera is a city you'll find it on a bucket list of travelers all over the world who really, really want to come here and live the cave experience. Sleep in a cave, eat in a cave.
Or have a drink in a cave, in your case.
Absolutely.
These cliffside caves, settlements for millennia, are drawing a new generation of filmmakers, tourists, and business owners, sparking a rebirth while celebrating the past.
Now it's incredible how the same reason why the city was labeled as the shame of Italy, now it's the pride.
Seth Doan found the perfect angle for this postcard from Italy.
They come from all over to get that same shot.
Do you get tired as a guide of taking that picture?
Sometimes, yes.
Massimo Lenzi says the Leaning Tower is the only site most visitors ask him to see in Pisa, this jewel of a town in Tuscany.
In the past, the people, they don't care. It's just something wrong.
This is something of interest to modern tourists.
Yes.
The bell tower started leaning when it was still under construction. Engineers of the 12th and 13th centuries tried making adjustments, but uneven soil was no match for so much marble.
Are people who come to Pisa aware that there are other leaning towers in Italy?
No, they don't think in there are other leaning towers.
So just imagine how the people of Bologna feel, which has its own leaning tower. Ever heard of Garisenda? Famed poet Dante Alighieri wrote about it a good 800 years ago, noting while trying to admire the taller, less lopsided Asinelli Tower, he was distracted by its leaning neighbor, Garisenda. Today it's making global headlines after being closed for safety reasons. It's leaning even more than that other tower that hogs so much attention.
The strange thing is that from the engineering point of view, the constructions become famous when something goes wrong. For instance, a tower that tilts is famous.
Professor Paolo Foraboschi has built a career stabilizing towers across Italy. He explains Bologna's skyline was once filled with them.
We would have looked out here in medieval times and seen 100 of these towers?
Yes. To show that you are rich, you buy a huge car or a boat. In the past, you built a tower.
But in those days, height could win out over structural soundness.
We discovered this summer from some data that the movement of the tower was different.
Matteo Lepore is Bologna's mayor. Last fall, he made the decision to temporarily close the tower.
Do you worry that it actually could fall over? No. A medieval tower is a strange thing. It's a sort of a body, no? And we have to take care of it with the awareness that in this time, we for sure decide not to build a tower like that.
They're still studying what to do and are looking west toward Pisa. In 1990, the tower there was closed for about a decade. They used cables and weights and removed 77 tons of soil to stop it from leaning a little too much.
I was involved exactly for the same problem in Pisa.
But a different cause may merit a different solution, says engineer Massimo Maianetschi. He's now working with industrial engineer Raffaella Bruni. We're evaluating various possibilities, Bruni told us, ranging from building a perimeter protection exterior to supporting it by holding it. Or there's the hypothesis of temporarily shortening it.
So one of the options is actually to lower the tower.
Yes. You know that in the 14th century, they removed 12 meters. Today, we say, well, we may apply the same system.
Today, it stands about 150 feet high. When it was shortened centuries ago, it was lowered brick by brick. Whatever today's solution is, they figure it'll cost at least $20 million.
Why are you raising money for these towers?
Because I woke up and I read what was happening in my city, and I felt not only the urgency, but the sense of responsibility and the opportunity of taking care of something that is going to be forever.
Chef Michele Massari grew up just blocks from Garisenda, but now lives in New York City.
So tonight is a dinner about New York and Bologna, towers and skyscrapers.
He opened his restaurant, Lucciola, on Manhattan's Upper West Side for a dinner fundraiser in February.
And ready.
On the menu, an edible bit of Bologna's cultural heritage.
Should we try it? Yeah, I got a spoon here for you.
Tortellini.
I think most Americans are surprised knowing there are so many leaning towers in Italy.
Do you think it started because we have such a great food?
Those structural problems, of course, are not diet-related. Back in Bologna, Mayor Matteo Lepore hopes all this attention may have an unintended plus.
I know that Pisa is more famous than Bologna in general, but I hope that with this occasion could be the new tilting tower. So a little tilting is good in a way for business. Yeah.
In medieval times, these towers were built as defensive structures. Today, they're at the center of a friendlier sort of competition.
Have you spoken with the mayor of Pisa? Only a few messages. Good luck.
Good luck.
Yes.
Time for some travel in style. Seth Doan has sent us a postcard from Lombardy.
It's a nice day for boating.
Fantastico. There's nothing like her.
This wooden 1970 Aquarama is not for sale.
This is one piece of cedar from Lebanon.
But you'd never know that from how Alberto Galassi speaks.
This one is a single piece of mahogany.
His enthusiasm for this boat, a Riva.
Wow, it has everything.
Started long before he ran Ferretti Group, which now owns the brand.
Do you always go boating in a suit?
No, but she deserves it.
He took us out on Italy's picturesque Lake Iseo, racing past Riva's factory as perhaps only the CEO could.
You wanted not just a boat, you wanted a Riva.
First of all, a boat is a Riva.
There's no other sort of boat?
No.
You sell other sorts of boats.
Yeah, I know, but let's be honest. I mean, when you say I have a Ferrari, you need to say you have a car. Everybody knows what a Ferrari is. Riva is the same thing. Riva is beyond boating. Riva is a myth. It's been in the hands of royals, movie stars, rock stars, sheikhs, kings, tycoons.
Riva's Aquarama, designed by Carlo Riva, debuted in 1962 during the glamorous La Dolce Vita years of Italy's post-war boom. Stars including Sophia Loren, Brigitte Bardot, and Elizabeth Taylor owned Rivas. And the boat itself plays a supporting role in dozens of films.
Don't shoot, don't shoot.
And talk about advertising, Riva was featured in Portofino last year, shuttling guests at the latest Kardashian wedding.
They are the new Sophia Loren. They talk to the new generation. Why not? Times are changing.
And times have changed for the company. While these wooden classics may be the spirit of Riva, the real money today is in super yachts, which Galassi says account for around 70% of Riva sales.
But how do you keep the sense of what made you famous in that super size?
That's in details. Details that remind you the previous models, the style. It's a bloody difficult job, I can tell you.
Some of those original design choices are still echoed decades later in the Anniversario model. It's a limited edition tribute to the Aquarama, which Riva stopped producing in 1996, spawning a new business, maintenance, the costly process of keeping them up.
This one dates back to 1963.
Richard Freebody showed us this Riva, dry docked for a tune-up at his boatyard on the Thames near London.
What's different about a Riva from another wooden boat?
That evocative feeling of the 60s and the glamour attached. It is the design. They were sort of the equivalent of a lovely Cadillac on the water.
Freebody's company makes its own wooden boats.
They're beautiful.
These are electric, but still have some more traditional details and extras.
This is our famous picnic drawer, which is becoming quite a must-have.
Nice. Everything you need for a picnic.
Even a cake knife for those afternoon teas by the river.
Very English.
Back in Italy, we saw some of that same attention to detail. Fabrizio Sonzogno was sanding wood for the Anniversario, which will get 20 coats of varnish.
How do you feel working on a Riva? Come ti senti quando fai questo lavoro per Riva?
Bello perché questo è l'anima del legno.
It's beautiful because this is the spirit of the wood, he told us. You can feel it. Alberto Galassi is working to keep Riva's spirit alive, though he says they'll never make an Aquarama again, saying it would be a sin to try.
It's a masterpiece. In Italy, we are obsessed, I would say, with beauty. Sometimes I say that we are condemned to beauty. Because we live around beauty, we're surrounded by beauty. Something is not nice looking, something is not beautiful, it gives you a shock. So we can't live without.
Sadly, most of us will have to live without a Riva. This one, nearly 50 years old, has gone up in value to roughly $750,000. But for a few minutes, it was still pretty sweet to get a taste of the dolce Riva.
Next stop, the American Academy in Rome. We have a postcard from Italy from our Seth Doan.
Under a grand portico just off a courtyard, about 40 or so usually gather for lunch. It's a group of mostly Americans in a setting that's distinctly Italian, framed by jasmine and fragments of Roman antiquities on the wall. More remarkable than the place, though, is the mix of people.
Who's sitting at that lunch table?
Oh, it's amazing. There are architects, there are designers.
We found a musicologist, a curator of antiquities, and a visual performance artist chatting away at this unique academic institution with an opera composer and Elena Past, a professor of Italian in Detroit.
We watched the chef out here in the garden picking your lunch. I mean, lunch is about more than eating here, though. It's very nice to eat.
It is. It's about creating community amongst the fellows. It's about giving you chances to talk about your work in progress, to work through problems, but also simply to deepen the relationships you have with the people around you.
Elena Past is a fellow here at the American Academy. She's writing a book and came to study the film stock of Italian cinema.
I'm thinking about analog technology, the materials that make the 20th century legible to us, memorable to us.
She's one of about 35 awarded the Rome Prize, a 10-month scholarship to come to Rome and join other artists and scholars here for a self-directed study program. But the word academy can be misleading.
How do you explain this place to someone who's never been here?
It's hard to explain because it's very, very, very unique.
Marla Stone has been here 9 times in various roles, first as a fellow, now as professor advisor.
I think of it as kind of Noah's Ark of creative people who are given room and board and given time and space to think and work and also to learn from each other, and then throwing that all into the mix of Rome.
The American Academy has evolved from its founding in 1894 as a school for architects and then archaeologists, first located at Palazzo Torlonia. It's privately funded, but follows in the spirit of academies set up by European governments. The French at Villa Medici were first in 1677, with the idea of sending promising artists and thinkers to Rome to get an education in the classics.
And having time to poke around, it gives you time to find the unexpected.
Next to her at lunch were composer Igor Santos and artist William Vigilongo.
My overall project here has been to come and find images of the Black presence in antiquity.
They found similarities in their work and began collaborating, with Santos composing a musical element for Vigilongo's sculpture.
You know, they were both projects that had the element of water included, and specifically fountains, right?
I want people to recognize that there's a fountain in the music.
Santos has recorded some of Rome's fountains as inspiration.
Hear the vibrations of the water.
Along with the score, his compositions can involve a digital component.
And I did some light programming, let's say, to have the sound of the piano control the movement of the water.
Wow, so as you play more forcefully, the waves pick up.
Correct.
We heard Santos's music carrying into the garden, not far from where Vigilongo, who usually works in Brooklyn, set up in this grand, light-filled studio.
It's like a large, stately sort of mansion. The taxis drop us off at the front gate and they're like, whoa, you know, who is this person?
It is quite a property.
Yes, it's a really beautiful place with also a deep history. Galileo demonstrated his telescope to the Pope in our backyard.
Elizabeth Rodini is the interim director.
The American Academy is really a place to foster new work, new collaborations, new ideas, and bring it back to the United States, refreshed and inspired by what they find here in Rome.
Thornton Wilder wrote the Kabbalah when he was here in the 1920s. In the 50s, composer Aaron Copland and writer Ralph Ellison were fellows. And in this century, Anthony Doerr worked on All the Light We Cannot See, which won a Pulitzer. It's a place to pick a project to explore, then share, and not only around that table.
How are you going to go back to your real life?
Well, it's going to be hard to leave Rome and hard to leave this beautiful space, but I do really feel like an important part of everything that's happened here is taking it back and sharing it.
Church bells are ringing the world over this morning, especially in the Italian town of Agnone. Seth Doan has sent us a postcard.
Easter Sundays have been ringing in this way for centuries. Here in the ridgetop town of Agnone, bells chime from 14 churches. This is Molise, one of the lesser-known regions of Italy. But this otherwise obscure location is at the heart of a 1,000-year-old tradition. It's home to the business Pasquale Marinelli was born into, one of the oldest bell foundries on Earth.
È stata fatta l'anima, quindi la parte interna.
It's not just work or heritage. For Pasquale,
Ho una moglie
it's a love affair.
che è la moglie, ma poi qui ho un harem.
I have a wife, but here I have a harem, he joked, adding, you have to love bells. They're cared for, caressed, and touched.
La carezzi, la tocchi.
Bricks make up the base, then layers of organic cement form the bell's shape, which is ultimately cast in bronze. These wax details will become a sort of stamp, personalizing the bell, but each one is already unique. The molds have to be cracked apart and destroyed as part of the process of removing the bronze.
How do you feel when the bells in town ring? Come ti senti quando le campane suonano?
I try to understand, he chuckled. Are they mine?
Sono le mie.
Vero? Hai questa domanda? You have this question?
Yes. I wonder if some of my ancestors made that bell, Pasquale told us. And I get excited because I know everything that goes into it. We asked him to take us up one of those towers to hear this bell made by his great-grandfather. Pasquale couldn't help but chime in, playing another one made by his father and uncle. Everything is handed down, Pasquale's older brother Armando Marinelli told us.
For how many generations? Da quanti generazioni?
Sono 26.
I'm 26th, he said. My son is 27th. Over the years, they've developed some prominent clients, including popes. Each bell is blessed by a priest. Easter is tied to bells because the sound of bells is a sound of joy, a sound of resurrection, Armando said.
Basically, the bells communicated events.
Important moments have been marked with bells for centuries, guide Massimo Cacio explained.
First Holy Communion, someone got married, someone died. The died is a very low tone, and they have big intervals, so it goes dong, dong.
And of course, they tell time.
The first ringtone would give the hour. The second ringtone will give you the quarter past. So 2:15 will be dong, dong, ding. 11:45 sucks.
It goes on and on.
He's brought his tour groups to this foundry and its museum for 16 years. For Americans familiar with the Liberty Bell, he's sure to note the damaged ones.
This cannot be fixed.
Once a bell is cracked, it can never ring properly again, but has to be melted down and refashioned.
This bell was hit by lightning.
They showed us the most dynamic step, in which they heat up the bronze, a mixture of copper and tin, and then pour it into bell-shaped molds buried in dirt. There was excitement in the air, even for this little demonstration. Now we're calmer, Armando added, and hope to hear these bells ring at Easter, the joy, the hallelujah. Finally, the most emotional moment, what they call the rottura, or breaking. For as many years as they've done this,
Still hot.
the work itself, it seems, never gets old.
Bello, complimenti.
Grazie.
Seth Doan has sent us this postcard from Tuscany, partly because he had no other choice. He'll explain.
This village in Tuscany, framed by cypress trees, does not just appear tranquil.
The silence and
It's beautiful. The only thing you hear is people talking in the street.
The ambient sounds here are that of conversation, and not on a cell phone.
Signal?
nessun servizio, as we say.
No service.
No service.
Pretty
yes.
typical.
Yes, yes.
Carlo Ducci grew up near Galliano di Mugello and wrote a guidebook about this place.
This is a part of Tuscany that's a little lesser known.
Yes, it's a hidden jewel.
A medieval jewel with a modern distinction, While it was once part of the fiefdom of the mighty Medici family, now it's noteworthy for the lack of power overhead. There's no cell phone service. The town butcher runs his business mostly by landline.
No line at all, no bars at all.
He does keep a mobile phone handy, but not for calls.
Stai giocando. You're playing a game.
This town is not alone. There are 91 municipalities across Tuscany struggling with cell phone service in a country which is surprisingly way behind technological times. Italy ranks near the bottom of the European Commission's Index of Digital Competitiveness, just behind Latvia, Czech Republic, and Croatia.
Per me non era un grosso sacrificio.
For me, it's not a big sacrifice, butcher Andrea Guasti told us. But for those who need to work or are involved in long-distance learning, there are great difficulties. And they go to great lengths, as we learned on this long road on the outskirts of town.
Vieni qua a studiare. You come here to study?
Sì, vengo qui spesso.
Yes, I come here often when the house doesn't have internet, Gregorio Ferretti told us. This 17-year-old says nearly once a week he has to hike up here as the slightest weather disruption knocks out their already shaky internet. There's no mobile service in town.
Hai segnale? Do you have a signal?
Sì.
But up here, he can get a little signal.
Tre bar.
3 bar non sono male, non sono male.
That's not bad. 3 bars is not bad.
Online learning, prompted by the pandemic, has created particular problems in this place, only eased a bit by the view. We have found the beauty of life and the connection between friends, he told us, but we are a little isolated.
Siamo un po' isolati.
At the local inn, owner Valentina Parini felt that isolation. She has a landline at reception, but that wasn't very helpful last winter when she was sleeping upstairs with just her cell phone and heard a burglar. I tried to call police from all corners of the room, she told us.
How hard was it to get a line that night on the phone?
20 minuti.
20 minuti, 20 minutes.
Sì.
Qualunque compagnia privata fa un investimento se ha un ritorno economico.
The village's mayor told us there's not enough profit in this tiny town for telecom companies to invest.
This is more than just an inconvenience, though. It can also be a public safety issue, a hazard.
Noi sindaci l'abbiamo messa.
We have a civil protection plan, Gian Piero Mongatti told us. For example, in December 2019, we had a seismic event. We tried to reach residents, but they were outside where there was no signal. So we had to send out the police with a megaphone.
Con il megafono a dare l'indicazione ai cittadini.
He's hopeful millions of euros in new European Union funding aimed at closing the digital divide could help Italy.
Ora la battaglia è ottenere una soluzione.
Now the battle is to find a solution, he said, and then we have the battle of fighting for the timeline.
It sounds like with no offense, it sounds like a very Italian situation.
Lo volevo dire io.
I would have said the same, he admitted. But while the practicality of this poses a challenge, in a place with no cell phones ringing or dinging, residents told us they have found the joy of conversation in person. So perhaps they're better connected after all.
If there is a fountain of youth, it may be hidden on an island in the Mediterranean. Seth Doan goes in search of the secrets of Sardinia.
The scene at an Italian cafe may not seem remarkable until you know their ages. They're each 100 years old. And Guido Lepori says he's got years to go.
150, 150.
Old age is common and celebrated in this town, where murals depict residents who've reached at least 100. Villa Grande is in Sardinia, a well-known destination for tourists who come for the culture and beaches. but it's also drawing scientists and gerontologists, including Gianni Pes and Walter Longo.
The whole world talks about this town. To have 6 centenarians out of 2,000-3,000 people, extremely rare anywhere in the world.
Longo directs the Longevity Institute at the University of Southern California and collaborates with Pes in studying this phenomenon of so many centenarians.
We are trying to find an explanation because after 20 years of hard work, we still don't have a clear explanation.
Villa Grande is a place where, after 63 years of marriage, one can still find Gabriele Mareu and his wife Ermelinda tending their garden.
Are you always this active? Siete sempre così attivi?
Sempre, no. Always, I've always worked, this now 96-year-old told us. So has his cousin Vittoria. At 93, she's still hired by the Orlando Hotel to demonstrate the traditional way of making this bread, pistoccu.
10% of people who are born in Villa Grande attain the age of 90.
10%?
10%. In Italy, it's 3%. So you can imagine it's more than 3 times higher than the national average.
Walter Longo thinks periods of fasting, for instance during wartime, followed by a richer diet with more protein and fat in later years, may contribute to longer lifespans. But meeting with those centenarians, he noted something else, the age of siblings.
How much of this is genetics versus lifestyle?
If you think about an athlete that wins lots of gold medals, you probably have to have the genetics, but then you have to have the training, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that the genetics set you up, but they're not going to get you there alone. And so then the lifestyle, and particularly the food, is a key factor.
Those lifestyle factors are on display. Living up in these mountains means regular exercise. And in town, community and family is important, particularly for Marietta Moni, who lives alone at 100.
Ha fatto Rita.
Rita made this.
We joined her for lunch made by family living in the apartment upstairs.
Buon appetito!
Buon appetito!
On the menu, pasta with tomato sauce. Historically, vegetables have figured prominently here.
Perfetto.
So has red wine.
Grazie.
Imbibed in moderation. Nearby at Giulia Pisanu's house.
Come sta lei?
Abbastanza bene per l'età che c'ho. Sto
Good
bene
enough for
adesso
the
da quando ero
age.
giovane.
We asked this centenarian what she thought the secret to a long life might be.
Non essere gelosa.
Don't be jealous and don't be envious, she answered. Advice that may not be scientific, but like those celebrated on the walls here, comes from the perspective and wisdom of age.
Now we take you back in time for one spectacular spectacle. Our walk through the pages of history is in the company of Seth Doane.
They march from their own quarters or quartieri of this city in the heart of Tuscany. These Italian cafe owners and teachers, mechanics and business people become in medieval costumes nobility, knights, and soldiers. While there is plenty of pageantry, their expressions reveal the competition at the root of this is real. Preparations have been underway for days in the Piazza Grande, as have practices for the main event, in which a knight on horseback hits a target to get points for his team. This spectacle, known as the Giostra del Saracino, dates back to the Middle Ages. And twice a year, the picturesque walled city of Arezzo is transformed, as is Enrico Vedovini, a local jeweler turned knight.
We train all year, for only 4 seconds.
4 seconds is how long it'll take to run his horse Pine across the square.
Giulio, sotto pancia.
We met at Vedovini's farm as he prepared for his 40th Saracino joust.
That's a lot of jousts.
But the pressure is the same.
He's helped his team win 12 times, making him something of a local celebrity.
Every day, everybody, you make Saracino, you make this.
People recognize you.
Yes, every time. And this I don't like too much.
You don't like it?
Not too much.
This uncharacteristically humble knight says tourists only see the Saracino with their eyes, whereas locals, he says, feel it in their hearts.
We have this game in our bloods.
In your blood?
Yes. These games reminds us our roots, our medieval roots.
Historian Fabiana Peruzzi grew up in this ancient city.
With everyone dressed up in these old costumes, for a while it seems the people actually match the backdrop.
Yes, also it seems to be back in time.
Back to a time when Tuscan cities were fighting both each other and foreign forces. The Saracino, Peruzzi explains, was a sort of war game.
During times of peace, knights needed to train to keep in shape. So the best way to do this was through these war games.
And the town would come out to watch?
Yes, of course. There were a very important event.
These games, a sort of twist on a joust with the prize a golden lance, have become a citywide obsession. Divisions are clear and color-coded.
Are you wearing green for a reason?
No, actually, my district is the yellow and blue one.
You can't wear green today.
Yeah.
That shade of green is tied to a team with 36 golden lances in its museum.
We won these.
Green and white are the only colors team manager Saverio Cristini would wear on these days, supporting his quarter, Sant'Andrea.
In my family, a part is to Sant'Andrea, another part to Porta Crucifera, that are enemy. In fact, during this period, with my mom, that is from Porta Crucifera, Mom, today I won't talk with you, okay?
Are you serious?
Yeah.
Just outside the museum, the team was fueling up its fans, preparing aperitivo and a 3-course meal for 700 people. It's part of yet another tradition, the pre-joust meal. Here, green and white was everywhere, including the nail polish on Laura Bori, who told us there was a division in her family too. Her sisters would never come to this dinner featuring Sant'Andrea's knight, Enrico Vedovini. The next morning on the big day, the teams paraded through town and were blessed by the bishop. And as spectators filled Piazza Grande, the streets behind it had a backstage feel. That's where we found Enrico Vedovini.
Now I'm ready. Now I prepare my horse and I go.
It's a lot of emotion, a lot weighing on you.
Big emotion now.
They may be in costume for this joust, but those emotions are authentic. A fight even broke out over perceived foul play, and police had to be called in to settle things in this melee of medieval uniforms. Then it was Enrico Vedovini's turn. He struck the center of the target, but then dropped the lance, losing all of the points. Ultimately, Porta Crucifera made the winning run, and fans flooded the field.
Even to get a question in.
It had been 6 years since they won.
Oh no, sono un giornalista, non posso. No, I have to be unbiased.
The truth is, this reporter does have his leanings in this case. After all, I'm married into a family from Arezzo, which is also divided. Passion is part of the tradition here. At Enrico Vedovini's farm, we saw him training with his 12-year-old son, Giulio.
Qui ti fai un arte, davanti a me.
Another generation preparing for another joust, just as they have for centuries.
No.
Some people dream of living in a castle. With Seth Doan, we drop in on a family who doesn't have to dream.
I've always loved living here. I've always felt very lucky to live here.
Did it settle in that you were living in a castle?
Not at first, if I have to be honest.
My home is my castle is not simply a figure of speech for Ludovica Sanazzaro. When did it feel special?
When I started taking my friends here and they were like, you know where you live? Like, are you actually realizing this?
Her family has owned this spot in Italy's Piedmont region for a good 28 generations. COVID forced, if we can say that, this 19-year-old back to her Italian castle after her performing arts school in Los Angeles shifted classes online. Now she's facing troubles, sort of like the rest of us.
The Wi-Fi. Sometimes it works perfectly, but sometimes it just doesn't. So
if you put the Wi-Fi over on that side of the castle, it might not reach the other side.
Exactly. That's the problem.
Perched outside their 12th century castle, above family dogs in the moat, it's clear Ludovica does appreciate the absurdity of it all. So that led her a few months ago to seize on the natural fascination with this place and use her free time. She started chronicling life on TikTok. Her account, The Castle Diary, quickly amassed hundreds of thousands of followers and millions of views, with a family church and dungeon.
And here, there was a secret passage.
Never mind the countless bedrooms and sitting rooms, there's a real variety of backdrops. But her most popular clips, including this one with more than 8 million views, have a theme, revealing the not-so-glamorous side of life. Reminding us that behind every royal fantasy lies reality. Imagine adding clean the ballroom to your list of chores. This is the ballroom?
No, it's not. This is just a room before the ballroom.
Plus, she says there's a fair amount of time simply spent looking for each other.
After you spend 2 hours trying to find people, you spend other 2 hours trying to find your phone.
There are bigger problems, and that's how this idea started. Years ago, the family turned this castle into a bed and breakfast, which was great until COVID, when bookings stopped.
This year has been a big problem.
A hit to the business.
Yeah.
Count Giuseppe Sanazzaro is Ludovica's dad.
This is an original 1292 document.
You can touch it with your hands?
I'm not supposed to, but I don't know where I put my gloves.
The history buff left his finance job to lose money in the passion project of bringing this castle and its story back to life.
The first thing that people say is, you are the castle owner, how lucky you are. You sure? You want to change? Come 1 month here and then you will change your opinion about living in a castle.
There are cracks here and there and a steep heating bill. And Ludovica's TikTok success, they say, has been a much-needed boost to bookings. It's also revealed another side of the Count.
I must say, there is a little bit of theater in me too.
Along with making cameos, he suggests historical storylines. But Ludovica's main co-star is her friend Lorenzo Rowe, who convinced her to start this account. Today's art and implements are a sharp contrast in this medieval place, but as through the centuries, audiences can be just as hard to satisfy, so they spend hours editing and tweaking. And notably, there's no script yet for Act 2. What happens when Ludovica moves back to the U.S. for school?
Maybe your dad can take over?
No. He's already in too many videos. Every day, he's like, oh my God, we're going to shoot something today. What do I have to wear? I have so many ideas. I'm like, okay, Dad, don't worry. Just let me wake up now because I just got out of bed.
Conversations, it seems, just like some of life's challenges, may not be so different just because home really is a castle.
It's a largely unseen collection of ancient statues that could become the art world's next big thing. And Seth Doane has a preview.
Antiquities are everywhere in the Italian capital, but incredibly, one of the most important collections was hidden away for decades.
It's like having 600 plus works of art drop out of the sky.
Archaeologist Darius Aria met us at Rome's Capitoline Museum.
This figure right here is just out of the textbooks. I mean, this is the sort of thing that we've all studied, but we've never seen.
It's the first time in about 70 years these pieces are on public display.
Is there any way to rank this collection?
This is at the top. This is the greatest private collection of ancient Roman antiquity.
It belongs to one of Rome's most powerful aristocratic families, the Torlonias, who over generations spent their banking fortune accruing art.
It's the who's who of antiquity here.
Busts of every emperor, sarcophagi, and reliefs.
This guy is arriving with the ship.
The 94 ancient Greek and Roman marbles on exhibition are just a fraction of the 620 owned by the noble family.
Why did this sit locked away for so long?
It's just very complicated. You have many different intentions of a family, you have many different intentions of the city, you have many properties, you have great costs.
Let's just say it took a while to work out the details. Over the years, the Italian state tried to persuade the Torlonias to sell or display the works. Plans to create a museum repeatedly fell through. Instead, the statues sat locked away in this Rome neighborhood until February of last year when we were allowed in.
So here we have a
We cannot reveal the exact location.
beautiful figure.
But archaeologist Salvatore Settis, the exhibit curator, let us get a glimpse before the precious marbles went on display. They were still restoring them after sitting here out of sight for decades.
Did you know that this collection was just somewhere waiting to be seen?
Everybody knows this.
He knew because Prince Alessandro Torlonia published this catalog in the 1880s.
The catalog doesn't seem strange to us today, but this in the late 1800s was very unusual.
It was very unusual.
Each piece photographed and numbered, but viewable only in 2D.
It's incredible to be surrounded by all of this.
Because each and every one of those pieces has a different story.
And the collection also serves as a history of restoration techniques.
All this part is not ancient. All this part was added.
While today we'd leave fragments.
This is the authentic piece and this is not.
In the past, the style was to reconstruct what was missing.
One of the statues was put together probably in 17th century out of 112 different pieces.
Wow.
Of at least 3 different qualities of marble.
Sometimes the newer editions are more significant. The head on this ancient goat was added around 1620 by famed sculptor Gian Lorenzo Bernini.
The head is spectacularly beautiful.
The Torlonia family acquired pieces through the purchase of villas packed with art, and sometimes carried out their own archaeological excavations on their properties.
When I first came in here, I was surprised by the number, though I knew the number.
So if you knew the number, why were you surprised?
Because seeing things in a book and seeing things in the real world is a totally different thing. It was really moving, really a great experience.
It's an experience more can have. The marbles are set to travel across Europe and likely to the U.S. as this remarkable record of our collective history is finally shared.
COVID is taking an economic toll the world over. Seth Doane offers proof in this postcard from Italy.
Creativity emanates from every corner of Italy, and this country's $67 billion fashion business taps the talent of these artisans who draw on generations of tradition. But the coronavirus is sending shockwaves through the industry, shuttering shops and canceling fashion shows, with losses reaching a staggering $20 billion. We traveled across Italy in recent months to see how artisans are coping in the COVID era. From the floors of a fabric factory in the eastern Veneto region to the rolling hills of Umbria. We began in the fashion capital, Milan.
Who are your clients?
Dolce & Gabbana, Armani, Bottega Veneta.
Raffaella Grasso inherited the embroidery business Pino Grasso Richiami from her father, and snapshots of past successes are posted on the walls.
The technique that we use is overlapping sequence very well, and that makes the difference. And this is something you can do only by hand.
This elaborate dress, worn by Eva Longoria at Cannes Film Festival, took 1,000 hours to embroider. And mastering this craft can involve years of apprenticeship. We met embroiderers who've been with the company for nearly 3 and 4 decades.
Wow, that's a lot of collective knowledge here.
But this craft is in jeopardy. When we visited last summer, orders from fashion houses were down 70%.
So we are working half and half.
Does that mean people are making half as much?
Yeah.
Since then, they've picked up some work, but are still down by 50%. They'd already worried about another wave of infections, which Italy is seeing now. It's a fight to keep the business going.
If we have to close, part of our knowledge and all our experience will be lost forever.
So thinking about having to close is not just about losing a business, it's about losing more than that.
More than that, yes.
In central Italy, the towns dotting the rolling hills of Umbria may appear remote, but the fashion businesses here are hardly insulated.
If stores don't open in Los Angeles or New York or Tokyo for that matter, there's an effect here.
Si sente sì.
You feel it?
Sì.
Luxury cashmere makes high-end sweaters, scarves, and shirts for top fashion houses, including Ralph Lauren and Brunello Cucinelli.
Anche va in America? Will this go to America?
Yes.
When we met last year, they were filling orders that had been placed last spring, before Italy's 9-week nationwide lockdown. But retail sales in their own shop were down close to 50%. The work itself is the same, Adria Castellani told us, but in past years we had more security.
Fashion is always a business projected in the future, because we need to think, to plan what will go on the shops next years.
Lorenzo Bonotto runs his family company, Bonotto Fabrics, which produces for Chanel, Alexander Wang, Tory Burch, Theory, and hundreds of other clients.
How did COVID affect business orders?
The beginning was a big hit.
But they've made up for those losses. Since they supply to companies in various countries, they've seen orders returning from places where lockdowns have loosened.
You've seen the orders go up and down in different parts of the world as the lockdowns have gone.
Thanks God, working globally, more or less, we were able to compensate. What was missing, the order missing Europe arrived from Asia. What now is missing from United States is arriving from Europe now.
This flexibility, he says, is an art, and he finds inspiration from the contemporary works they have on the walls. His dad started collecting decades ago, and today they have more than 17,000 pieces.
You don't expect to look around a factory, a warehouse, and see forklifts driving past big pieces of art.
Yeah, you're right.
They thrive on creativity. It's central to imagining new fabrics and designs.
Only because we have the art around us, help us to be creative. And creative is the first vaccine against the COVID.
The first vaccine.
Of course.
Is creativity.
It's a mental vaccine.
Finding opportunity is unusually challenging in this environment, but these artisans who've built businesses based on their talents are now drawing on that same creativity to survive.
An American in Florence is doing his best to keep a classic approach to painting alive. Seth Doane has his close-up and the wider view as well.
The faint smell of oil paint and turpentine, years and years of it, wafts through this studio. It's a sanctuary, no ringing cell phones, and a throwback, a place to learn an art almost lost to time.
If you weren't teaching this technique, what would happen?
This technique would be dead, I think. Remember, the great advantage of sight size is this idea of having the canvas alongside where you get
the maestro or master here is Charles Cecil, an American who can trace his teacher's teacher back to the great portrait artist John Singer Sargent.
This is one of our portrait rooms in this particular studio where they're actually...
In his small school for about 20 students, we saw a dance of sorts, a back and forth from the canvas that's key to this special technique he's been passing on for more than 35 years.
What I see up close, of course, is not what I see at a distance. What I see up close are her eyes, but her lips are entirely out of my focal range. From back there, I can see the whole work together. So,
this back and forth method is part of a style of painting called sight size.
Sight size literally means drawing to scale. This developed during the Renaissance and was used by the British school of the 18th century and by John Singer Sargent. That's where we get it from him.
And how does the portrait, the end product, change?
It's the visual impression as seen from a distance.
It's interesting, even you're looking at how much this tiny little white sparkle makes such a difference. It brings it alive.
That's the soul.
Cecil is a purist. While many portrait artists use photos of their subjects, note there are no photographs here. He argues a portrait should not be merely an exact reproduction. It should capture the soul of the sitter.
I mean, we were talking about these little glints.
Highlights.
Yeah,
they're quite hard.
Emily Rogers is 23 and in her second year.
It's funny, before you put them in, it kind of looks a bit kind of dead sometimes, and then just brings it to life, one little mark.
Just down from her, Francis Kelleher, a 30-year-old, 4.5 years into his studies, was working on perfecting the technique of chiaroscuro, Italian for light and shadow. He used the most technologically advanced implement they employ, a mirror.
So the main purpose of the mirror is to refresh your perspective. We generally use it because over the process of the 3 hours that we normally work for, the eye becomes tired, and so you stop seeing your mistakes. By seeing it with a fresh eye, it's the same effect it would be if I came back to the work in 3 or 4 days. I'm seeing it afresh, it's brand new to me, and I can immediately spot the mistakes.
You have a mirror. A mirror is so important. We all make the same mistakes, and that's what's comforting, because the human eye stumbles in the same way.
The students and Cecil himself are not only surrounded by art inside. This school is located in Florence, birthplace of the Renaissance.
You think seeing all of this art around you affects you as an artist?
It does indeed, every day, with every breath.
Cecil first came to this Italian city in the heart of Tuscany in his 20s and vowed to return by age 30. He did, and it's been home ever since.
I ride my bike from my home on Via Pandolfini, which is a street that Dante grew up and from which he was exiled. I tend to weave through the mass tourism, but there are invariably the great palaces, the great windows as well, just the great design that you see on the way and you glimpse, and one never tires of that.
His studio in the oldest working atelier in Florence shares a space with Raffaello Romanelli, whose family has been sculpting in this building for about 200 years.
All the great sculptors and painters too.
Right, and draftsmen like yourself.
Like Michelangelo also.
Yeah.
Cecil sees the importance of studying the past. He says because of smartphones and selfies, we're inundated by photos, and it's ruining painting.
We're just seeing so many images, we've lost appreciation for them.
In fact, I don't think we spend much time looking at it, unless it's a Leonardo. you know. Unless we're told to look at a masterpiece, I'm not so sure that we would spend the proper time looking at it the way that once upon a time that was the only image of reality we had.
Which is why he invites students to retreat from the technology and pace of the outside world, to come here, bathed in a north light, and with that soft smell of oil paint, to find the rhythm of another time.
The Corsini estate, Villa Le Corti, sits atop a hillside outside Florence, in the Tuscan wine region of Chianti, on land the family has owned since the 1300s. Do I rightly address you as Princess Corsini?
Principessa.
Principessa.
Yes, that's right.
Principessa Corsini. Princess Georgiana Corsini, along with her husband, Filippo, head the family now. Merchants and bankers for more than 600 years, the Corsinis built much of their fortune during the Renaissance, a fortune largely devoted to preserving the art and architecture of Florence.
They thought that art was really the good and important and universal message, and the message that could survive during generations and generations.
Royalty has been in the family since 1730, when Lorenzo Corsini was elected Pope Clement XII at age 78, creating the official royal bloodline. He's best known for commissioning the Trevi Fountain in Rome. But for more than a century, Villa Le Corti was left to sit empty, and time took its toll.
I tried to, to restore, to maintain.
She decided to bring the house and ancient winery back to life for her son, Prince Duccio, and his family.
Oh!
This is the family tree.
Yes, that is.
It starts from the Middle Ages.
The ones that have little portraits, what is the significance of?
They're important.
They are.
Today, one of Italy's historical treasures sits behind the villa's walls.
It's our family's history. It is the history of Italy.
Spread throughout 11 rooms in an untouched part of the house.
So this is an accounting book.
Virtually every piece of paper ever recorded by the Corsinis, dating back to 1020. Wills, love letters, even receipts, preserved for history.
There is no plumbing, no electricity, no heating, just to preserve the papers as they have been preserved for centuries.
The rich family legacy of one of Italy's richest families under one Tuscan roof. And it's at the Galleria dell'Accademia by Michelangelo's masterpiece, his statue of David, where we begin our look at Florence, past and present. Founded during Roman times, Florence has for centuries been a hub of commerce. At its center, the Duomo Cathedral and the Ponte Vecchio Bridge, built in the 14th century, the sole bridge to survive Hitler's bombing during World War II.
The Ponte Vecchio was the only bridge remaining across the Arno when the Germans completed their demolition.
It's said it was deemed too beautiful to destroy. The poet Dante, of Inferno fame, was born in Florence in 1265. And then, starting in the 1400s, under the Medici family, Florence gave rise to the Renaissance. Today, their Pitti Palace features 30,000 works, 11 alone from Raphael. Leonardo da Vinci got his start in Florence, as did Michelangelo, whose sculptures adorn the Medici family chapel. He's buried at the Santa Croce Basilica, as is the writer Machiavelli, and Galileo, the astronomer. Another Florentine great, explorer Amerigo Vespucci. He gave his name to the Americas.
An unprecedented flood wreaks havoc on this world center of Renaissance art.
In 1966, a flood swept through the city, killing dozens and endangering monuments and artworks. A plaque marks the high water mark, some 16 feet above street level. Declared a UNESCO World Heritage Site, Florence attracts at least 10 million tourists a year. And on this Sunday morning, us. The Uffizi Gallery is truly an art museum like few others, bursting with treasures dating from ancient times to the present.
Seven years before the Declaration of Independence, it was the first museum in the world to open their doors to everyone who wanted to come, artists.
Eike Schmidt is the director of the Uffizi and our personal guide through its many treasure-filled rooms.
Well, this is one of the rooms not to be missed by anyone, even if you're on a super tight schedule, the Leonardo da Vinci room.
Rather than trying to take everything in, Schmidt suggests focusing on the Adoration of the Magi, never finished, still showing an artist at work. Next stop, a room jointly honoring Raphael and Michelangelo.
And the absolute masterpiece in this room is the Doni Tondo by Michelangelo. This is something that Michelangelo painted just before he went to Rome to paint the Sistine ceiling. So if you see this, you might not even need to go to Rome.
On to the Botticelli room and the birth of Venus.
Here is something everyone has already seen somewhere, and still it's one of the most mysterious paintings ever painted.
A treasure at every turn.
It is certainly one of the greatest concentrations of works of art that exists.
In Florence, the tradition of art and craftsmanship continues to this day. Here's our Martha Teichner.
We're here next to the Leonardo da Vinci Warper.
You heard right. Leonardo da Vinci designed this machine for winding thread. There's a copy of his sketch.
He designed it in the end of the 1400, and then this was made in the 1600.
This very machine, still in use 400 years later.
Made directly from these machines, you have these beautiful braids.
Filippo Ricci is CEO of silkmaker Antico Settificio Fiorentino.
We're actually, now entering into the historical part, if I can say that.
Okay.
It's the 1700 looms.
In 1786, the city's most prominent families handed over their personal looms so Florence could go into business producing the luxury fabrics its aristocrats wore.
This is the Ermisino. It's a special kind of a Renaissance taffeta. It changes the color according to how the light hits the fabric. Wow. And this you have green and red combined.
This goes back to the Renaissance.
Yes. And it has a special sound.
Yeah, I love the sound. A city of businessmen, bankers. Florence was always into conspicuous consumption. Just look at its art and the gold jewelry sold on the Ponte Vecchio.
Originally, it was a place for selling fish and meat.
Elaine Ruffalo is an American Renaissance art historian who lives in Florence.
When the Medici became Grand Dukes of the city, they don't like the smell of all that fish and meat. And so they changed the function of the bridge to the place for the goldsmiths. And it has had gold shops on this bridge since 1565.
As bankers and then powerful political figures, the Medici were famous patrons of the arts and of artisans. For Florentine artisans today, the past is the present.
Ops, la si parla e vola l'oro.
She said, talking makes the gold fly.
Restorer Stefania Martelli uses the same techniques, the same tools, the same gold as gilders working for the Medici.
Welcome to the Chapel of the Princes.
The Florence tourists visit is one big display of Medici taste.
This is all inlaid stone?
All beautiful inlaid stone.
It's called pietra dura. The words mean hard stone. You could be fooled into thinking this is paint, but it's not.
Explain what we have here.
It's a stone world.
Elio De Filippis heads Pitti Mosaici,
These are made today by us.
a workshop creating pietra dura almost exactly the way it was done during the Renaissance.
This is going to be this part here.
The artistry is in searching thousands of stones
This is the lapis lazuli.
for the perfect color and shading, then cutting and fitting the pieces together like an intricate puzzle.
The subtlety and the variation of color.
Yeah.
It's slow, painstaking work. Elio's sons are learning how to do it, but
When I started, we had several workshops in town. I would say between 25 and 30.
And now?
Only 3 left.
the good news, there are still nearly 500 traditional artisan workshops in Florence. The bad news, that's 75 fewer than 10 years ago.
It's a very, very old technique.
Maria Giannini is the 6th generation in her family to make marbleized paper. Once used in bookbinding, now this is more of a beautiful novelty for tourists. But she hangs in there, making one sheet at a time, because for her, for so many of the artisans of Florence, it's about passion.
It's very important. It's a satisfaction, and it's also to give people a piece of my art and my history as well. So it is important because I live something.
That is amazing.
Yes, yes, it's magic.
Balsamic vinegar, black gold, is what the experts call it. Seth Doan explains why.
In Italy, this is called the vendemmia, or grape harvest. Yet this Lambrusco varietal won't become a red wine, but something else which could take far longer to mature.
Balsamic vinegar truly begins in a vineyard.
Rolando Beramendi is a chef, cookbook author, and U.S. importer of artisanal Italian foods.
But I think that what is very important is the skin. You see how thick is the skin? It has all the tannins in there.
And that gives it color.
And that gives it the color.
And flavor?
As well as flavor.
He introduced us to his balsamic supplier, Francesco Leonardi. Normally, he explained, what's harvested today will become a good balsamic vinegar in 25 years.
Un processo lungo, it's a long process.
I don't think there's a more beautiful product in the whole world like balsamic vinegar.
It's called the Black Gold of Modena, this northern Italian city that's also home to some other notable Italian products, Ferrari, Lamborghini, and Maserati. Balsamico can be a luxury product for the table, so valuable that historically it was used as a gift among noble families or as a wedding dowry.
It was almost like you were exchanging DNA.
By exchanging the balsamic vinegar.
Francesco Leonardi, whose family has been at this since the 1870s, explained how they first press the spremuta, or grape juice, which is then heated for 24 to 36 hours, and put in giant oak barrels for at least 2 years, where it ferments. Then, as it reduces in a process called travaso, it's siphoned into increasingly smaller barrels of different woods.
Gelso is mulberry, chestnut, frasinus ash.
All these different types of woods. And they each give different flavor notes.
Yes, that's it. It's sort of each one of them will impart and leave a beautiful mark of flavor in the balsamic vinegar.
Leonardi let us sample a balsamic they've been aging for 100 years, which could retail for more than $1,000.
Inside this little barrel, there's the history of 4 generations trapped inside this balsamico.
You need many generations at work because this takes so long to make. Certainly, Giovanni Leonardi explained, those secrets are passed on through generations. He added, you can't make balsamic vinegar in a day. Balsamic is so important to this part of Italy that there's a giant sculptured drop of it sitting in a traffic circle, though clearly it's more common at the table.
People are going to look at this and say, this doesn't seem like the balsamic vinegar that I buy in the store for $5 or $10.
No, it's not. And just like, you know, you can buy a little Fiat 500, you can buy a Ferrari, right? This is Ferrari, the other one is a Fiat 500.
Which Rolando Beramendi thinks may be best appreciated simply on a spoon.
To me, it just coats my entire mouth with a feeling that no other product gives me. It's more than just a food. It's balsamico.
When in Amsterdam, do as the Dutch do, ride a bike. When in Rome, on the other hand, well, here's Seth Doan.
The best way to see this icon of Italy,
Andiamo!
maybe from the back of a far more modern one.
There it is.
She's a beauty.
Annie Ogile is a Minnesota native.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Who, after a dozen years here, navigates the roads like a Roman.
So now we're going back inside the walls.
Thanks, of course, to her Vespa.
We're taking the time to enjoy the ride, to see what's around us, and to be seen. First thing we need to do is get you suited up. Oh, yeah.
She started a tour company, Scooter Roma, to let visitors see Rome as she does.
Don't take the bus. Get on the Vespa.
It lives what's been called the Vespa Vita, or Vespa life.
Driving the Vespa is definitely a lot about style.
Why did you want a red Vespa?
Because it's sexy. It's beautiful. Stands out. I'm not a shy girl.
And the Vespa helps show that?
Absolutely. I make an entrance no matter where I go.
When you drive a Vespa, you are wearing a Vespa.
You see all of you. It's part of...
It's exactly part of your look.
At Vespa's headquarters and factory in Pontedera, Italy, Davide Zanolini sounds like he works in fashion, not scooters.
This is really the place where we create the new collections.
These are all possibilities.
These are possibilities.
Vespas come in 12 shades today. The plan is to let future buyers customize them, choosing from about 20 colors.
This light blue was one of the colors of the late 60s, beginning of the 70s.
Parent company Piaggio had been manufacturing planes here through World War II. Then in 1946, as Italy struggled to recover from the war, Piaggio designed a scooter for the masses. It was cheaper than a car, more accessible, and of course had that coveted Italian style.
Vespa contributed very much to the independence and the freedom of women in Italy.
Simply because of the design, because you could get on this wearing a dress.
Exactly.
And in Roman holiday, Vespa got the sort of product placement companies can only dream of.
Do you owe a debt of gratitude to Hollywood?
Yes, for sure. Gregory Peck and Audrey Hepburn driving the Vespa in Rome is probably the most iconic image.
We saw how designers today are trying to retain some of that vintage glamour.
Vespa has strong roots in the past, but has to look forward.
Marco Lambri is Vespa's chief designer. He explained how they worked to find the right balance to move this heritage brand into the future.
This is the first Vespa, and this could be the Vespa of the next century.
But you see with this red line here that the shapes are similar.
Yes, very similar.
Digital ideas take shape in the model shop.
You have to recognize a Vespa when you have your eyes closed.
On the road, at least when on a Vespa,
Does the lipstick match the Vespa?
Yeah, I tend to wear red.
Annie Ojal thinks heads should turn.
And pow, we have the Palatine Hill.
The Romans designed a pretty spectacular backdrop a couple thousand years ago. And Vespa, just over 70 years old, seems to fit right in. One could say perfetto.